My world revolved around the click of my camera and the flavors of my kitchen. Ever since I was a kid, I've been glued to my mother's side in the kitchen, soaking up every technique and secret she had to offer. Growing up, we spent countless weekends exploring the nooks of every obscure eatery we could find, dissecting each meal like a critical science experiment. This curiosity wasn't confined to the kitchen. Inspired by food critics like Matthew Ford and Jonathan Meades, I devoured their writings, learning to look beyond taste and texture to the stories and processes behind every dish. After culinary school, I dived straight into journalism, merging my two loves, writing and eating. My career as a restaurant critic began with local publications, but soon my critiques and culinary adventures were being followed by thousands on social media. I traveled, I ate, and I wrote. Each new restaurant was a chapter in my ongoing culinary saga. But one evening, my routine took an unexpected turn. I was at La Maisonnette, a cozy little bistro with a reputation for reinventing classic dishes. As I was setting up my camera for the perfect shot of a beautifully deconstructed beef Wellington, a voice interrupted my focus. "Naomi Baxter? The Naomi Baxter?" The woman had a broad smile and an enthusiastic tone that filled the space between us. Caught off guard, I lowered my camera. "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "I'm Helen, and this is my husband, George, and our son, Eric. We're huge fans of your work." She gestured to the two men with her, who seemed equally pleased to meet me. It was always a bit surreal to meet followers in real life. "Thank you. It's always nice to meet people who appreciate good food as much as I do," I responded, trying to mask my surprise with politeness. Helen's excitement didn't wane. "We're here celebrating my husband's birthday. Could you perhaps join us? It would make our evening." I hesitated, my introverted nature screaming for an escape. But the genuine warmth in her eyes was hard to resist. "Sure, I'd love to," I said, and meant it. As I joined their table, Eric, who had been quiet so far, turned to me with a curious expression. "So, what's your favorite dish here?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and challenge. "I'm actually about to find out," I replied, smiling. We spent the evening talking about everything from the best pizza in Naples to the most overrated food trends. Eric was particularly opinionated, which made for lively conversation. As the evening wound down, Eric and I exchanged numbers. "Maybe you can show me some places that are actually worth the hype," he suggested, a playful smirk on his face. "I might just take you up on that," I replied, the prospect of exploring new culinary landscapes with someone who shared my passion suddenly appealing. That date turned into a relationship, and then into an engagement. After the wedding, settling into life with Eric felt like mixing oil and water at times. Sure, we'd eventually blend, but it'd take some serious shaking up. Moving him into my apartment, the one place that had always been my sanctuary, was the first step in what I'd come to call Operation Coexist. "Naomi, giving me access to your bank account will take our relationship to a new level," Eric had said, half joking but with a twinge of joy in his eyes as we sat down with our laptops to merge our finances. "I agree," I replied, hitting enter with a bit more force than necessary. "Just don't make me regret it," I added, trying to keep the mood light. The daily grind of living together brought its own set of challenges. Eric was a creative soul, which apparently meant he was allergic to cleaning up after himself. Coffee mugs became a part of our decor, and his clothes seemed to prefer the floor over the closet. His casual dismissiveness grated on me, but I bit my tongue. Love meant compromise, and compromise meant not flipping out over toothpaste caps, or the lack thereof. When Eric suggested a vacation to the coast to celebrate our first year together, it sounded like a dream. Just us, a beach, and no work emails, he had pitched it, and I was sold. I dove into planning mode, lining up a quaint beachside cottage and a list of must-visit local eateries, not the tourist traps but places with real, gritty flavors. I had everything mapped out, down to the sunset times. But there at the airport, waiting for our flight, was the first twist in my meticulously planned getaway. "Hey, babe, look who's here." Eric waved me over to where he stood with two very familiar figures, his parents, Helen and George. "Wait, what?" I stammered, the smile freezing on my face. "They're coming with us?" "Yeah, it's kind of a family tradition," Eric explained as if he were talking about something as trivial as trying a new ice cream flavor, not springing extra travel companions on me. Helen chimed in, blissfully unaware of my growing dismay. "It'll be so much fun, Naomi. Just like the old trips we used to take when Eric was a boy." As we boarded the plane, I settled into my seat, taking deep breaths and reminding myself that I loved Eric enough to endure a week with his well-meaning but overbearing parents. The vacation was a study in patience. Helen and George had a knack for finding the most expensive gift shops and fanciest restaurants, racking up charges that made my frugal heart skip beats, not in a good way. One evening, after a particularly lavish dinner that I thought was charged on George's credit card, I complimented them on their choice. "That was quite the splurge. Glad you're treating yourselves." "Oh, dear," Helen laughed, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just money, and that's why we live to spend it." I spent the rest of the trip oscillating between enjoying stolen moments with Eric and silently blaming my extravagant in-laws. But through it all, Eric was there, his presence a reminder of why I was weathering this storm. It started with the bank account. I checked it the day after we got back. The balance was lower than I remembered. Way lower. I called Eric over, pointing at the screen. "Can you explain this? Because unless I've started sleep shopping, these numbers don't make sense." Eric scratched his head, avoiding my eyes. "Yeah, about that. My folks were a bit short, so I covered some of their expenses on vacation. From our account." I stared at him, my mouth hanging open a bit more than I'd like to admit. "You did what?" "Eric, that's our savings. We talked about this, joint decisions." He shuffled his feet, looking like a scolded kid. I know. I messed up. It won't happen again, I promise." I wanted to scream, to shout, to throw something. But I didn't. "Just, don't let it happen again, okay? We can't afford these surprises." Fast forward a month, and Eric was all excited about a new plan, an overnight picnic just for the two of us. "A chance to really relax, just you and me, no interruptions," he said with a wink. I threw myself into the preparations. Food, blankets, games, it was going to be perfect. We rented a motorhome, and I packed it with all our favorite snacks and meals, carefully calculated to last us the entire trip. But when we pulled into the campsite, my heart sank straight into my shoes. There, parked just a few slots down, was a very familiar car. As Eric's parents ambled over, smiling and waving, I felt the picnic slipping away. "Naomi, darling, what a surprise to see you here." Helen chirped as if it were the most natural coincidence. Eric turned to me, his smile sheepish. "Since they're here, we should share, right?" Dinner was a disaster. I watched our carefully portioned meals get devoured, and by the end of the night, I was picking at crumbs, my stomach growling louder than the crickets. Sleeping was another level of hell. Helen and George took over the motorhome's bedroom because of George's bad back, and Eric and I ended up in their cramped, cluttered car. Between the lumpy seats and their loud snoring echoing outside, sleep was a distant dream. "Can we just go home?" I whispered to Eric in the dark, my voice tight with frustration. Back home, just when I thought I could breathe again, there was a knock on the door. George and Helen, bright and chirpy. "Naomi, we were wondering, which restaurants around here would you recommend? The really good ones?" George asked, notebook in hand. I raised an eyebrow. "Planning a little tour?" "Oh, we love trying out new spots. Especially when they have open events, free food, you know?" Helen giggled, as if it was the most clever budgeting trick. I glanced at Eric, waiting for him to say something, anything. But all he did was shrug. "That's just how they are, babe." After they left, still planning their freeloading tour, I sank onto the couch, drained. Eric sat beside me, taking my hand. "I'm sorry, Naomi. I really am. We'll set some boundaries. I promise. Meanwhile, life went on. I was about to review this new gem in town, La Cucina, known for its avant-garde Italian dishes. Excited, I had already teased my visit on social media, revealing the date and time I'd be there, hoping to drum up some anticipation among my followers. Walking into La Cucina, I found my usual spot, a quiet corner table with good lighting, perfect for photos and unobtrusive enough to observe without being a spectacle. I had just unfolded my napkin and was about to dive into the menu when I heard an all-too-familiar voice that made my stomach knot. "Naomi, darling, what a coincidence seeing you here." Turning around, my forced smile froze on my face as I saw Eric's parents, Helen and George, approaching. Before I could muster a response, they had taken their seats opposite me. Helen, as always, seemed oblivious to the inconvenience, her eyes scanning the menu excitedly. "I just love this place already," Helen exclaimed, her voice a pitch too loud. She looked around, then leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that wasn't quite as quiet as she probably thought it was. "But dear, you eat here for free, why can't we enjoy a little too? We're family after all." Frustration bubbled up inside me, and I couldn't hold back any longer. "Because, Helen, that's not how this works. It's unprofessional and embarrassing. I need you both to leave. Now." The smile fell from Helen's face, replaced by a scowl. "Embarrassing? We're your family. And here you are, treating us like nuisances." The few patrons close enough to hear our exchange glanced over, and I felt my cheeks burn with shame. "Please, just go. I'm working." George stood up, shaking his head. "We're going now. But remember, Naomi, family is family. You should treat us better." They gathered their things, and Helen, before storming out, turned back to deliver one last barb. "I'm sorry I ever encouraged my son to marry you. I thought having a food critic in the family would have its perks, free meals, a bit of luxury. Clearly, I was mistaken. Since you're not willing to share your perks, we're not interested in being part of your publicity." As they left, the weight of their words crushed down on me. I sat there, the buzz of the restaurant now a distant hum. My appetite was gone, and the excitement for my review had evaporated. I couldn't focus on the flavors, the plating, or anything really. Packing up my things, I left La Cucina before even placing my order. On my way out, I apologized to the manager, promising to return another time under better circumstances. Once home, I logged onto my social media to explain to my followers why there would be no review tonight. I kept it vague, unforeseen personal issues, I typed. The responses were sympathetic, but the warmth of their words couldn't chase away the chill of what had just transpired. I paced the living room, waiting for Eric to come home. The words of his mother haunted every corner of my mind, swirling around like a bitter storm. Did Eric really marry me just because his mom pushed him into it? The thought made my stomach churn. When I heard the key turn in the door, my heart jumped into my throat. Eric walked in with a smile on his face. He saw my expression, and knew this wasn't going to be a quiet evening. "Eric, we need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. I didn't want to beat around the bush, not tonight. "Your mom said something today. She said she convinced you to marry me. That you didn't want this at first. Is it true, Eric?" He sighed, a deep, weary sound, and looked at the floor. "It's true that Mom pushed for it more in the beginning. But Naomi, I swear, what I feel for you, how our relationship has grown, that's real. I love you." Hearing him admit that his initial intentions were less than pure felt like a punch to the gut. But his confession that he grew to love me brought a confusing mix of relief and lingering doubt. "I love you too, Eric, which is why this hurts so much. We need to figure this out, how we can move forward from here," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to keep it even. Eric nodded, taking a step closer. "I know, and I'm sorry for not being honest from the start. Let's give ourselves a real chance, Naomi. Just us. We can limit our time with my parents for a while, focus on us." The idea of cutting back on family drama sounded like a breath of fresh air. I think that's a good idea. We need to be sure about us without anyone else interfering. I agreed, feeling a weight lift slightly at the prospect. A couple of weeks later, Eric brought up a weekend trip, just the two of us, to another city. There's a train ride to Springfield. We could leave Friday night, come back Sunday. What do you think? His eyes were bright with the promise of adventure. That sounds perfect. Just make sure, it's just us, okay? No surprises this time, I said, half joking but needing the reassurance. I promise, Naomi, it's just us. No one else, he swore, and something in his earnest gaze made me believe him. The night before our trip, I packed my bag with a light heart, excited about the prospect of exploring new restaurants and escaping our routine. I double-checked everything, tickets, reservations, my camera for impromptu foodie shots. Eric, just to be clear, your parents aren't coming, right? I asked one more time as we got ready for bed. He chuckled, kissing my forehead. For the 100th time, it's just us. No parents, no drama. I climbed into bed, the first flutter of genuine excitement in weeks tingling in my stomach. The morning air was crisp, filled with the bustle of commuters and the distant whir of trains pulling in and out. I clutched Eric's hand as we approached the station, imagining the adventures that awaited us. As we stepped onto the crowded platform, a familiar laughter sliced through my daydreams, chilling me to the bone. There, approaching us with wide smiles and waving hands, were Helen and George. My stomach dropped, a cold dread replacing the warm flutter of excitement. Eric, feeling my hand tense in his, looked at me and then followed my gaze. His face fell, and he quickly looked down, muttering, "I couldn't stop them from coming." I stared at him, my mind reeling. "What do you mean you couldn't stop them?" "You promised me, Eric." My voice was a harsh whisper, barely containing my betrayal and anger. Before he could respond, Helen bounded up to us, beaming. "What a wonderful surprise for you, Naomi. We thought we'd join you two lovebirds for a little adventure." I forced a smile, playing along while my mind raced. This was it, the final straw. The lie, the deception, it was all too much. "How lovely to see you both," I said, my tone light but strained. "Traveling light, I see?" I nodded towards their single, small purse. Helen waved her hand dismissively, the beads on her bracelet clinking cheerily. "Oh, don't you worry, dear. We know you'll take care of everything like you always do." As the call for boarding echoed through the station, we moved towards the train. Inside, I sat by the window, Eric and his parents chatting excitedly across from me. As the train's doors began to close, I stood abruptly. I just remembered, I forgot one of my bags back at the station. "I'll just grab it quickly," I said, my voice calm, almost cheerful. I stepped off the train, the doors sliding shut behind me. Through the window, I saw Eric's confused face, his mouth forming my name. But I turned away, my decision firm. My phone buzzed insistently, Eric's name flashing on the screen. "Naomi? Naomi, where are you? The train is moving. Come back." His voice was frantic, a mix of confusion and anger. "We're done, Eric. I'm staying here. And I want a divorce," I said, my voice steady, resolute. "What? You can't, Naomi, please." His voice cracked, the sound of the train's rumble drowning him out. "I've already blocked your access to my accounts. Don't call me again." I hung up, cutting off any reply, any plea he might have had. My hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter as I drove away from the train station, my mind a whirlwind of emotions. I didn't expect to feel so liberated so quickly. I wasn't far from the station when my phone erupted with the shrill ring of a call. I glanced at the screen, Helen. My heart skipped, not out of fear, but annoyance. I took a deep breath and answered. "Naomi, you ungrateful little, how dare you leave us like that? Stranded." Helen's voice was a mixture of rage and shock. "I didn't leave anyone stranded, Helen. This is on you and Eric," I replied, my voice calm, controlled. You'll pay for this. I'll make sure everyone knows what a horrible person you are. I'll ruin you." Her threats were empty, her words fueled by anger. I chuckled dryly. "Go ahead, Helen. And while you're at it, remember the laws about slander. I won't hesitate to take this to court." She sputtered, taken aback by my calmness. You'll regret this." Before she could continue, I cut in. "Oh, and Helen, one more thing." I paused for effect, knowing what I had would silence her threats. "I have a video from the restaurant. Remember? When you decided to help yourself to some souvenirs? It would be a shame if that went viral." The line went silent. I knew I had hit the mark. "Think twice before you try to bully me again." The call ended, and I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew dealing with Helen and George wouldn't be without its challenges, but now, they knew I wasn't going to be pushed around. When I arrived home, the first thing I did was start packing Eric's things. Each piece of clothing, each little knick-knack that had found its way into my space over our time together, it all went into boxes and bags. It was methodical, almost therapeutic, the physical act of separating his life from mine. As I folded a shirt of his, my phone buzzed again. I checked. It was a message from Eric. I didn't open it. Instead, I blocked his number. If he had anything to say, it could wait until he was ready to pick up his things. With each item I packed away, I felt more of my space, and myself, returning to me. The apartment slowly morphed back into the sanctuary it had been before Eric moved in. By the time I was done, several bags and boxes lined the hall. Sitting down on the couch, I felt a profound sense of peace. It was over. Really over. I could start to rebuild, to find joy in the solitude and freedom I hadn't realized I'd missed so much. Monday began with a sense of expectation. I heard the key turn in the lock mid-morning. Eric walked in, his face a mix of hope and apprehension. His eyes brightened briefly when he saw me, and he stepped forward, leaning in for a kiss that never landed. I was quicker. I stepped back, pushing the suitcases filled with his belongings between us. "Eric, we're done here," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. He stopped, confusion and hurt flashing across his face. "Naomi, I cut him off, holding up the divorce papers, already signed by me. "Here. I need you to sign these." He took the papers, his hands trembling slightly. "Naomi, listen. I talked to my parents. I told them off. They won't be a problem anymore. I don't even speak to them now." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "Eric, it's not just about your parents. It's about us. You lied, repeatedly. You never stood up for me, for us. Where was your spine when your mom dictated our life?" He looked down, unable to meet my eyes. "I know I messed up. I thought I was doing the right thing, keeping the peace." "By sacrificing our peace?" I interrupted. "No, Eric. It's too late. I don't feel valued, I don't feel respected. I can't live like that." Eric was silent then, the reality of the situation settling over him. He signed the papers with a shaky hand and handed them back to me. As he turned to leave, I felt a surge of relief, tinged with sadness. "Eric," I called out, and he paused at the door. "I hope you find what you're looking for. And I hope you find the courage to be your own man someday." He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and then he was gone. The click of the door signaled the end of our shared path. The divorce proceeded quietly. There was nothing much to divide, our lives had been intertwined, yet our possessions remained distinctly ours. Surprisingly, even Helen stayed away, perhaps finally recognizing that her involvement had only fueled our downfall. Now, as I sit in my living room, the quiet hum of the city outside my window, I feel a profound sense of peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've made the right decision, however hard it was to reach it. I'm back to living on my own terms, my space once again just mine, my time my own. I've started to focus more on my work again, exploring new restaurants, experimenting with recipes at home, and reconnecting with friends who I'd neglected. I've also returned to my photography, capturing moments of life around me, each shot a celebration of freedom and a new beginning. As I look ahead, I'm excited for what the future holds. I've learned a lot about myself, about my strengths, my limits, and my worth. I'm moving forward with a clearer vision of what I want my life to be and whom I want in it.